Good evening, everyone. My name is Solana Nazaro-Clark, and I have the distinct honor to serve as the head of Princeton Junior School. For nearly 40 years, PJS has specialized in the important continuum between early childhood and elementary education. And just this year, we have added grade 6. I am in front of our hearth in the Commons, central to our school, where our community gathers. Aristotle said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." At Princeton Junior School, we take pride in building trust with our students, tapping into their innate knowledge of themselves as learners, nurturing their curiosity and challenging them as agents for a better world. We celebrate each student's voice as an integral part of our diverse school family. Our aim is that they may thrive as young scholars who are prepared for a life of continual growth. We teach the importance of taking care of one another, showing gratitude and effort. Our students grow confidently and call upon their toolbox as collaborative problem solvers. At PJS, children feel understood, supported, and empowered, loving to learn and learning to love. Parents are a child's first teacher. When parents join our school, we ask their hopes and dreams for their child. And as a parent myself, I often find a commonality with most parents in that one of our greatest wishes for our children is to be happy. Why is happiness important? How can we support our children in achieving it? Well, tonight, Dr. Sonja Lyubomirsky, a 30-year leader in positive psychology, will present and discuss key findings that have emerged in science. Drawing on her groundbreaking research, she will discuss the how, why, what, when, and who of happiness, and offer simple strategies that have been found to reliably improve happiness. Dr. Lyubomirsky is a distinguished professor and vice chair of psychology at the University of California, Riverside. Her undergraduate degree is from Harvard and her PhD is from Stanford. She has been honored with the John Templeton Foundation grant, along with many other awards, grants, and honors. Even more impressive, Sonja is a parent of 4 children, ranging from elementary school through college. Sonja's book, The How of Happiness, has been translated into 22 languages and published in 36 countries. It has been the focus of Princeton Junior School's Parent and Faculty Book Club this past month in preparation for this evening. Together, we generated several questions, just as you will tonight. Please include your questions in the chat during the presentation. At the end, we will curate all questions for Dr. Lyubomirsky, and she will have a chance to respond. You can also email your questions to pcgtickets@gmail.com. According to the Dalai Lama's inspirational words, happiness is the highest form of health. Now, may I present our esteemed guest this evening, Dr. Sonja Lyubomirsky, who will share her extraordinary findings on happiness. Sonja, welcome.
Thank you so much, Silvana. What a beautiful introduction. I love seeing you in front of the fireplace. And I'm also sitting in front of a fireplace at home. Really generous introduction. I'm really delighted to share my work on happiness with all of you, a really cool audience today. I hope that what I talk about today, you will find interesting and useful in your own lives. I can't promise that I'm going to make you all happier, but I promise to arm you with a great deal of information. And as Silvana noted, I think I can empathize with many of you because I have 4 kids. The 2 oldest are in college. They're both at small liberal arts colleges and both graduates of a wonderful independent school in Southern California. And then I have a 3rd grader and a 5th grader. And I myself actually went to an amazing independent school in DC called the Murray School. So anyway, I can empathize with lots of you. So let's talk about happiness. Happiness is so relevant right now. Let me actually show you my students and collaborators. Let me see if this works. Okay. These are the students and collaborators that I've done my research with. So my students and collaborators and I have been thinking a lot about trying to understand and how to maintain our happiness and our sense of connection during the pandemic, but really during like all times of life, both the regular ups and downs and times of adversity. The book that much of my work is mentioned is called The How of Happiness on this slide, but I also have a website that I'll show to you guys at the end, and all of my papers can be downloaded easily and for free from my website. I'm going to begin today by taking a long step back. So during the Second World War, aviation experts used a lot of energy and resources studying military planes. They were studying military planes that went down. And one day somebody asked, why don't we study the planes that stay up in the air? And I think this is an apt metaphor for the work that I and my students and collaborators and colleagues do in what we call well-being science. Some people call it positive psychology. I don't love that term just because it presumes everything else is negative. Anyway, well-being science. We study why happy people are happy, why successful people are successful, why healthy people are healthy. And fortunately, a number of laboratories, including my own, have been toiling to address these questions. So today I'm going to give you a flavor of the different kinds of experiments that we've done to try to understand how happiness can shift over time. And also I'm going to give you the conceptual model, kind of the theoretical framework that drives my research and gives you kind of the big picture. I believe that most of us want to be happy. We may not use the same language, the same words to describe that wish. We might define happiness differently. We might pursue it differently. But I think the desire for happiness, as surveys by psychological scientists around the world show, appears to be a universal, or at least a near universal goal. You know, basically, if you ask people around the world, what do they value in life? And on average, people will say happiness is at the top of their list. Now, before I begin, I should quickly define the term happiness, also called well-being or subjective well-being. Well, I, along with many researchers, define happiness as consisting of two components. The first is the experience of frequent positive emotions. So frequently experiencing joy, interest, pride, peacefulness, affection, enthusiasm. Of course, the experience of negative emotions at appropriate times when not too severe is also appropriate for sort of good functioning. So you have the experience of positive emotions, but that's not sufficient. The second component of happiness is having a sense that you're achieving your life goals, that you're satisfied with your life, that you're kind of progressing towards your life goals at the pace that you like. And that's basically what I like to think about these two components of happiness as being happy in your life and being happy with your life. So you kind of need both of those sort of parts of happiness to be a truly happy person. And I should add that hundreds of studies have now shown that people who report being happy in their lives and being happy with their lives are healthier and they live longer. Happier people are more creative and productive. They're better leaders and negotiators. They have more social support. They have more fulfilling relationships. And they're better able to bounce back from adversity and trauma. So happiness is not just something that feels good. It's not just about pleasure. It has many benefits for ourselves and for our families and for our communities. So being happy really leads you to accrue kind of lots of good things in your lives. I should mention, of course, the causal direction goes both ways, and there are third variables. So for example, making money makes people happy, but happier people are also more likely to kind of accrue more money. Or it could be that there's a trait that happy people have that leads to both happiness and making money. So I want to tell you a little bit about some of these studies in more detail, because I think they're really important and interesting, hopefully, especially to this audience. And I'm going to first tell you a little bit about the few studies on physical health, so important for all of us, and so certainly for our children, for the youth as well. So studies basically show that happier people have stronger immune systems and are healthier and even live longer. So there are many longitudinal studies in this space, which basically measure how happy people are at one point in time, and they follow them across time and see if they get sick. And I'm going to show you some intriguing findings, and every single line that I'm going to show you is a finding from different studies and different samples of people. So basically what this research shows, that people who are happy at one point in time have been found to have a lower incidence of stroke 16 years later, and a lower incidence of heart disease 10 and 15 years later. These are all different studies that have shown this. If you have heart disease, if you're happier, you're more likely to survive it up to 11 years later. If you have lung cancer, you're more likely to survive it 3 years later if you're happier. Happier people are less likely to be on disability 11 years later. And this is actually intriguing. Happier people are even less likely to die in car accidents. And we can sort of think about why that's the case. Maybe they're more likely to wear seatbelts or more likely to pay attention on the road, to the road. And happier people basically live longer. Now, I should mention that this doesn't mean that we should sort of blame people who are sick, that it's their fault and that they're not happy enough. Of course, that health has many, many, many determinants, but happiness is something that contributes to our health, and also being healthy also makes people happier. So happy people are not only happier, they're also more productive and creative on the job and at school. So there's also benefits of happiness sort of for work and school and academic domains. And there are, again, many studies in this area, but I'm going to mention just a couple to you today. So these are sort of studies on that showing that happy people are more productive and more creative. So one study looked at most of the studies I'll talk about today are done on adults, and we can talk later about implications for children and youth. I think that the findings, my expectation, and some research shows that findings are very, very similar for youth as well. So in this study, researchers went to actually a California agency, and the researchers measured how happy the employees were at this agency. And then they returned, and 3.5 years later, they interviewed or surveyed the department managers or the supervisors of the employees, and they asked them to rate each employee overall on their work performance, but also on these dimensions. Does this employee offer useful ideas for solving technical administrative problems? Does this employee have high performance goals? Do they pay attention when you're talking to them? And do they work well or harmoniously as a team or with others? And so those were the outcome variables. And what the study found was that the happier employees, and happiness again was measured 3.5 years earlier, were rated as superior by the supervisors or managers on all of these dimensions to employees who were less happy. And so this applies basically to everyone kind of watching and listening today, that basically one way to say it is that, say, the 50 happiest people, watching my talk right now, are going to be the most productive and most effective at work and at school in 3 years or in 5 years, whatever number of years. So there used to be this parlor game a long time ago where people had to choose whether they wanted to be successful or to be happy. And I think that's a really false dichotomy. Basically, research shows that actually happier people are more successful, that happiness and success kind of go together. So there are quite a few other studies at different workplaces and classrooms that show similar results. Now, some researchers take a different approach to study this question of whether happiness has benefits. And so, for example, there are studies that are experimental where we try to make people happy, at least feel happy temporarily, and then see if that temporary happy mood leads them to be more productive or more creative or have stronger immune system. And indeed it does. So for example, one study that I'll tell you about, this is a study that was actually done with medical doctors, with internists, and researchers basically made these doctors happy temporarily by giving them a package of candy. So there's lots of different ways to make people happy kind of for 10 minutes or a half an hour. You can give them a gift, you can give them positive feedback, you can show them a funny video clip, but giving sort of candy or gifts is a popular technique to make people happy. Of course, this study had to exclude people who are on a diet, who would not have been made happy by getting a gift of candy, and also diabetics could not be in this study. So anyway, so the doctors were randomly assigned to either a group that was giving candy or they were in a neutral group, and then their creativity was then tested. And there's different ways to test creativity. In this particular study, researchers used what's called the remote associate test. And this is a test that basically there's a whole bunch of items, and on each line there are 3 words, and your task is to come up with a 4th word that, if you combine with each of these 3 words, it creates a new word. So kind of what do these 3 words have in common? So I don't know if anyone wants to kind of think about what the answer to this one is. Crab sauce pine. And I will tell you the answer is apple. So crab apple, applesauce, and pineapple. So the idea is that you get a whole bunch of these items, and the faster that you are able to do these items and the more you complete, kind of the more flexible, creative thinking that you show. That's kind of been finding from other studies. And the results from this particular experiment was that those participants, those doctors who were put in a happy mood by getting this gift of candy, they basically did better on this test. They showed more creativity than those who were in a more neutral mood. And it's kind of amazing to me that just getting a gift of candy makes people sort of score higher on this creativity test. So so basically, and there's other studies that show similar effects, and the growing evidence really shows that even small pleasures can have big and important and positive consequences. So making sure that you and your kids or your students or family members or coworkers experience even short-term positive moods is very important. So, okay, so I hope that I've convinced you, at least in part, that happiness at work and school is a good thing for many reasons. And it turns out the majority of people around the world say that they want to be happier. So, when I talk to people at parties about what I do, I'm often asked, is it even possible to become happier? And the answer is yes. Fortunately, there's been tons of randomized controlled experiments that have sort of been trying to answer this question. Is it possible to become and to stay happier? And if yes, how? And that's what sort of we've been toiling in my lab and others to find out how to do that. So basically, randomized controlled experiments have now shown that people can become happier when they practice or they deliberately practice what I call positive activities. So activities like expressing gratitude on a regular basis, or savoring the good things in their lives, or pursuing meaningful goals, or doing acts of kindness. I'm going to tell you about some of these studies today, but today I'm going to focus on how doing kind, grateful, and social acts, being more generous, being more grateful, and being more social, makes people happier. So my lab and other labs have been testing the conditions under which these kinds of activities are most successful in making people happy, but I'm also interested in the conditions under which these so-called positive activities can backfire and might sometimes make people unhappy. So we can talk about the dark side of the pursuit of happiness as well, if you're interested. So my laboratory conducts what we call positive activity interventions, and they're kind of like clinical trials. And these days, everyone knows what a clinical trial is, right? We're all sort of following like vaccine trials. And so in clinical trials, researchers are testing, like, does this vaccine actually work? Does this medication work? And what is the proper dosage of the vaccine? And for example, I had read my kids finally are going to get their vaccine in California in a couple of weeks, that they're getting 1/3 of the adult dose. So you have to figure out what the right dose is. And should some people not take it? Maybe there's contraindication. So we actually ask very similar questions in our research as well, where we're doing these sort of what we call positive interventions or happiness, positive activity interventions. So in our studies, we basically typically instruct our research participants to practice a particular positive activity. And these are examples up here of the kinds of positive activities that we have studied. And they do that for about a month usually, but anywhere from like 4 to 10 weeks or 3 months. And then we follow them to see whether that exercise makes them happier over time. And of course, we also have various comparison and control groups, right, to compare the experimental group with. Now, I'm primarily interested not just in sort of which activities will work to make people happier, but how and why do they work? That's partly actually why my first book was called The How of Happiness, because I was trying to understand how is it that expressing gratitude makes people happier. Also, it's sort of a how-to book, so that was kind of a little, that was the reason for the title. So to bear with me for a moment, I'm going to show you kind of the big picture, that this is sort of the model, the theoretical framework that drives our research. And essentially, this model illustrates which factors, both features of the activity itself, which is on the lower left, the box on the lower left, and features of the happiness seeker, the box on the lower right, sort of impact how effective that activity is. And so basically that is sort of the how of the pursuit of happiness. So the how is like, is the person motivated? What is their personality? What is their culture? What's the dosage of the activity? And the why is like, why does it work? So for example, when we ask the question, why is it that expressing gratitude makes people happy? Maybe because it leads to more positive events in a person's life. So I'm going to refer to this figure throughout the talk to kind of, I'll refer back to it when I tell you about the different studies that I've done. Okay, so the very first study that I want to tell you about is actually a study that is in the How of Happiness. It's a pretty old study. So, but it's kind of a typical study, so I wanted to sort of tell you about it. So in this kind of typical study, we had volunteers count their blessings, and everyone should, I'm sure, knows in this room or whatever, your own rooms at home, what that means, basically, counting blessings means like keeping a gratitude journal. We had people in the study write down 5 things for which they're grateful, as the slide shows, over the course of 6 weeks. Now, furthermore, they did this either 3 times a week, so every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, you write down 5 things you're grateful for, or one group was randomly assigned to count their blessings just once a week, every Sunday night. And now the control group in the study just sort of didn't do anything, they just completed our assessments of happiness, and were not prompted to be grateful. I should note that in almost all of our other intervention studies, we have more appropriate or more active control groups, because that's actually very important what the control group is, what you're comparing against. So what do we find? So interestingly, we found that those individuals, this is a histogram, these are histograms that show changes in gratitude and in happiness from before to after the intervention. Again, this is a 6-week intervention. And interestingly, we found that those individuals who expressed gratitude once a week became significantly grateful. This is the orange bar, more grateful and significantly happier over time relative to the control group. But those who practiced their gratitude 3 times a week didn't actually change at all in their gratitude or in their happiness. And this was a little bit surprising to us, but although not so anymore, I guess, after thinking about it for a long time. And I think the reason is that counting your blessings 3 times a week might have become a chore, might have become kind of monotonous, maybe sort of lost its freshness and meaning for our subjects, but counting your blessings once a week was effective. Like sometimes I've given talks where sometimes people will approach me and they'll say, it's interesting because a lot of religious rituals in the United States, at least, or at least for some religions, happen once a week. So maybe there's something about kind of reviewing your life once a week that's really meaningful or special or kind of works for people. I should also mention that trying to be grateful too much might actually backfire and undermine your happiness. So imagine if you're trying to think of like lots of things to be grateful for very frequently, you might have trouble coming up with things that you're fortunate, right, to have in your life. And this is called the effort as information heuristic in psychology. If you have trouble coming up for things to be grateful for, that really backfires, and you might conclude that you may not be so fortunate after all. We did a study actually with high school students where we asked them to either think of 2 things to be grateful for, to count 2 blessings, or to count 4 blessings, or 8 or 16 or 32 blessings, to kind of find out where is the sweet spot, right? What's the kind of Goldilocks like number. And we found that 8 was kind of the optimal dosage, that people who counted 8 blessings kind of reported the most positive emotion, but we're trying to replicate that study right now. So anyway, so these studies all speak to the importance of dosage. And if you look at the bottom left-hand corner here, so this is a feature of the activity that we need to pay attention to when we're trying to kind of craft the optimal sort of happiness intervention, the most kind of successful happiness exercise or happiness hack. Okay, so now on to a different kind of activity, acts of kindness. So this is also one of the first interventions that I've ever done, an example of where we ask people to do acts of kindness instead of count their blessings. So we did this back in 1999, and actually I was kind of excited to find out a couple of years ago that this study appeared on the SAT exam. And actually I found this out from friends of the kids of friends, right? Because I don't know what's on the SAT test. And so that was kind of fun to see it there. So anyway, so what we found, or what we did in the study, is we had 3 conditions. We asked people to do 5 acts of kindness all in a single day every week for 6 weeks. So imagine like today's Tuesday. On Wednesday, say every Wednesday for the next 6 weeks, do 5 acts of kindness that you don't normally do. That was one condition. Another group, we asked them to do 5 acts of kindness each week, but to do it on different days. And then we had a control group. And what we found was also, these are examples of the kinds of kind acts. We've done lots of studies where we ask people to do kind acts. Again, these are things that you sort of wouldn't necessarily normally do. And these are actually, now that I look at this list, these are kind of bigger kind acts, but sometimes people do little things, report kind of fairly small acts of kindness. So they kind of range from small to big to medium. And we've actually never found that like bigger acts of kindness have bigger effects on happiness, because it's possible that if it's big, it's also a burden. So it kind of those sort of effects cancel each other. Okay, so what we found is, again, that it's important to pay attention to dosage when you're trying to kind of design the optimal happiness intervention. In this study, we found that only those individuals who did acts of kindness all in a single day, like do all your 5 generous things at once, they became happier, and the other conditions did not. So it's kind of like swallow all your pills all at once is better, is more impactful and powerful. But don't do this with pills, but do it with kindness. And so my hunch is that when people spread their 5 acts all across the week, that they just weren't as salient, weren't as powerful as when they did it all in one day. Okay, so again, this kind of showed us the importance of dosage and to consider when we are crafting the optimal happiness intervention. Okay, moving on, we did another kindness study, and this is a paradigm that we've been using more often because I think it has some better control groups. So I want to show you another example of something to consider when you're trying to maximize your sort of the success of a happiness strategy, and that is sort of consider whether that strategy is directing attention onto yourself or onto other people. So this is a study that we did with a diverse sample of participants, and it was a 4-week intervention with a 2-week follow-up. And we found that it's critical to focus on others. So in this study, we had 3 conditions that I'll show to you. In one condition, we asked people every week do 3 kind acts for other people. So this is very similar to the other study, except we had 3 kind acts instead of 5. So let's say every Monday or every Wednesday for the next month, do 3 kind acts for other people you wouldn't normally do. But then we had a comparison group that was a really good comparison group, I think, where we asked people, instead of doing 3 kind acts for others, do 3 kind acts for yourself, every week for 4 weeks. Now, by kind acts for yourself, I don't mean self-compassion, which I can talk about later. I really mean kind of self-indulgent or self-care acts. So it could be get a massage or have a piece of chocolate or take a nap or whatever, take a walk or do something that you really want to do to treat yourself. And the control condition is a control condition that we almost always use in our interventions, where we ask people to try to kind of organize their time by keeping track of their daily activities. So the idea is that the control conditions should also be sort of positive, or at least somewhat positive, because otherwise, so it makes us more confident that the experimental group, the 3 kind acts for yourself or others, is working for the sort of reasons that we think it's going to work. Okay, so those are our 3 conditions where we randomly assign people, and this is what we found. So this is psychological flourishing or well-being over the course of the study. A baseline right before the 4-week intervention begins. Post-test is right after the 4-week period, and then we had the 2-week follow-up. And you can see in the study, there's only the group that did kind acts for other people. They became the red line here. They became happier and they stayed happier through the follow-up. The group, I think what happened is that the group that did kind acts for themselves, they felt good while they were doing the kind acts, but then when we came back to them a week later, 2-3 weeks later, at the end of the week, that those positive emotions didn't necessarily last. Maybe even made them feel a little guilty. So, but this study is interesting because it sort of shows you that ironically, if you want to make yourself happier, you should try to make someone else happier, other people happier. So this shows that the importance of sort of directing your attention onto other people as opposed to yourself. And kind of as an aside, I and others have found that sort of one of the sources of a lot of people's problems is too much attention to yourself, right? So we often are kind of pay too much attention to ourselves. We ruminate, we might become sort of self-absorbed. And so anything that we can do to kind of redirect our attention onto someone else or something else, it could be a hobby or your work or school, tends to sort of help people and alleviate, negative emotions. Okay, so now I want to talk about culture. Okay, so an important finding from our lab is that culture matters. I haven't talked about sort of person variables, and where there's a bad fit between your culture and what you're doing to pursue happiness, then your pursuit will either have no effect, it might actually make you feel worse. Now, research on happiness interventions across cultures could be a whole other talk, but for now, I'll just show you the results of one cool study that we did. So in this study, what we did is we went to South Korea and we instructed participants in the United States and in South Korea to either to write gratitude letters every week or to do 3 acts of kindness every week. Now, I haven't talked to you about gratitude letters, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Where we ask people to write gratitude letters. Basically, you choose someone to write a letter to, and you can write, we have a certain number of time, maybe 8 minutes or something, 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 10 minutes or more if you want, and you write a letter sort of talking about the things that, thanking the person for ways that they've supported you or, helped you in your life. And we've done quite a few gratitude letter studies. So again, in this study, students wrote gratitude letters, or they did 3 acts of kindness each week. And this is a 6-week intervention. Again, they did it either at my university where I teach, UC Riverside, or at Seoul National University in Seoul, South Korea. And this is what we found. So first, I'm going to show you the results for students in the US. And the results were really interesting. So as you could see here, these are changes in well-being from before to after the intervention. So pre-test is right before the 6-week intervention. Mid-test is right in the middle at 3 weeks. Post-test is right after. And you can see the American students, they became happier when they wrote gratitude letters every week to different people in their lives. Oh, very important. We asked people not to share their letters of gratitude. You just sort of write it for yourself, so you don't share it. Sharing is also important and is also meaningful. It makes people happy. But if we ask people to share their letters, then we'd be sort of conflating 2 different things. One is expressing gratitude and one is sharing gratitude. So we separate those 2 things in our study. So we ask people to write gratitude letters or do acts of kindness. And again, American students became happier both when they did acts of kindness and when they wrote gratitude letters. But it was really interesting what happened in South Korea. The Korean students showed a small but significant increase in well-being when they did acts of kindness for others, but they did not become happier. They actually became sort of non-significantly, there's a trend for even a little bit less happiness when they wrote gratitude letters. So we were really surprised, well, a little bit surprised. We expected some cultural differences, but we didn't think we'd get such a big cultural difference. And so I actually, right after I did this study, I happened to be invited, this is pre-COVID, to give a talk in South Korea for their Ministry of Education. They were starting a new kind of happiness education in the middle schools. Because they have, South Korea, I don't know if you guys know, they have a very, very intense educational system where students are really, really stressed out, and they had a really high suicide rate among youth in South Korea. And so they were trying to figure out what to do about it, including implementing what they call happiness education. And so I showed the results of the study. And so I got like lots of interesting feedback where people told me, in Korea, people feel mixed emotions when they express gratitude. So it might make them feel connected and good, but also it might make them feel guilty for not sort of paying back or not thanking the person sooner. It might be sort of awkward to share gratitude. Parents in Korea mentioned how sometimes they feel disrespected when they're thanked by their kids. In America, of course, we love being, when our kids express gratitude for us, right? It doesn't happen often enough. But in Korea, I was told that it might actually be almost like insulting when your kids thank you for supporting them, because it's like implying that it was optional, because it's, it's something that you consider to be a parental duty. So gratitude is actually a very rich and interesting experience to study. And I'm happy to talk more about that if anyone is interested. But sometimes gratitude makes you feel humbled because you're sort of standing on the shoulders of giants. It's not just about you. Sometimes it might make you feel ashamed for needing help in the first place, or awkward for sharing your gratitude. There's some conflicting emotions that you might feel when you express gratitude. Okay, moving on. So this is an example of a study that showed the importance of considering culture when you are pursuing happiness. Okay, moving on. We also completed an experiment with more than 500 working adults who were prompted to engage in either 12 more social interactions over the course of a month or 12 more pro-social interactions. Now, pro-social interactions are basically kind acts. So here we're interested to compare kind acts to social acts, because we thought, well, maybe the reason that helping others makes us happy is because most helping is sort of direct, we're doing, it's a social behavior. I mean, you can, of course, give money to charity anonymously, but that's actually pretty rare, at least in our studies. And so anyway, so in this study, we asked people over the course of a month to do 3 social things, like engage in 3 social interactions, like talk to your barista or chat with your colleague that you don't normally do. three more social interactions per week over the course of a month, or engage in 3 pro-social interactions over the course of a month. And what we were interested in is how connected do you feel while you're sort of talking to the barista or your colleague, or while you're bringing a cup of coffee to your friend, when you're helping someone, how connected do you feel? And by connection, I mean, how warm do you feel towards them? What's your sense of mutual trust? How in sync do you feel with them? And how many positive emotions do you experience while you're doing this? And so we have a couple of findings from the study that I wanted to highlight to you. And the first finding is what we found was it mattered how you sort of helped or social interacted with someone. What was the medium? So basically what we found was that the more voice and face-to-face contact there was, the more connection people felt, the more in sync, the more warmth, more mutual trust, and in turn, the more positive emotions they experienced. So basically when you helped or socially interacted with people by phone, by video chat, or in person, I should mention this study was done before the pandemic, there was more connection felt. The outcome variable on this graph is magnitude of connection. And the more connection, the more positive emotion. So basically, this is kind of a summary of this. The medium mattered. The more visual and voice contact, the more connected people felt, the happier they were. So this finding demonstrates that the digital interactions generally were not as connecting or as happiness inducing. And as an aside, my lab has become very interested in studying lately the role that technology, and particularly smartphone and social media use, play in our well-being, in people's well-being, and particularly the connection and happiness experienced by teenagers and especially teen girls. So I'm happy to talk about that more. Okay, so digital interactions were not as connecting, but also it mattered who you're helping or who you're talking to or social interacting with. Basically, we found that the closer the person is to you, the closer the target, the more connected and happy you felt. So partners, family, friends, there was more connection than with strangers, acquaintances, neighbors. Now that was the case in our study. There are studies though that show that even social interacting with strangers, again, like the barista at the coffee shop, who actually may not be a stranger, or neighbors, coworkers, also are happiness inducing. So I don't want to say that connection only happens with people who are very close to you, but sort of relatively speaking, there's more connection when we're close to someone. Okay, so now I want to tell you about, so that's that was a summary of that finding, that the target mattered. The closer the target of kinder social acts, the more connected people felt and the happier they were. Okay, so now I want to tell you about a couple more studies that we found that are relevant to kind, grateful, and social interactions. And that is, we've recently become interested in whether positive activities can do a lot more than make people happy. So for example, doing acts of kindness can have benefits beyond happiness. And in a really exciting study that we've done with an immunologist at UCLA, we did a study where we had a very similar design as before, that I showed you before, where we asked people, randomly assigned people to do acts of kindness for others over the course of 4 weeks, to do acts of kindness for the world. Actually, that's a group I hadn't mentioned before, to do acts of kindness for yourself, or to keep track of daily activities. But in addition to measuring happiness, we also took people's blood and we measured RNA gene expression in the blood. And we found in the study was that only in the condition that did acts of kindness for other people, we found changes in RNA gene expression associated with a healthier immune profile. And so that decrease you see there shows downregulation of pro-inflammatory genes. And we recently replicated this study, and we found again that only the group that did acts of kindness for others, not the group that did acts of kindness for themselves or control group, showed downregulation of pro-inflammatory genes and also upregulation of antiviral genes. Now, it's too early to say, but the suggestion is if you want to ward off viruses, you should support and help other people in your community. So that's kind of a cool study. I also want to tell you about a couple of studies that we've done with youth and kids. Most of my research, as you can see, is with adults. And we did a study with in middle schools in Vancouver, where we asked kids. So again, these were 4th, 5th, and 6th graders in 11 different schools in the Vancouver School District. And we did a 4-week acts of kindness intervention where we asked kids to do 3 acts of kindness every week for 4 weeks. And then we had a control group where we asked kids to just visit 3 places every week. And we found in the study that the kids who did acts of kindness, not only did they become happier, but they actually became more popular or more accepted by their classmates. And our measure of peer acceptance was a standard measure that people use, where everyone in the classroom gets a list of everyone in the classroom, and you circle the names of the kids that you'd like to be in activities with, or you'd like to play with. And so essentially we found that those kids who did acts of kindness actually were more likely, got more nominations by other kids in the classroom of who they want to play with after the study than before the study. And amazingly, the acts of kindness that these kids did were primarily outside the classroom. So it wasn't that they helped their classmates and the classmates wanted to play with them. It was just something rubbed off on them as they came back into the classroom after, say, helping their grandmother or helping a sister with homework. So acts of kindness can also lead to peer acceptance. I also been interested in whether gratitude can do more than just make us happy. And so we've been interested in sort of this idea that when people express gratitude to others, it can move you to want to be a better person. So the idea is that imagine that if you spend time to truly kind of authentically and genuinely kind of think about the people in your life. And we did a study that I'll show you with high school students, with 9th and 10th grade students. So imagine you're a high school student and you're really considering how like your parents and your teachers and your coaches, how much they've supported you over the years, how much they've helped you and paid for your lessons and stayed after school and helped you with homework. It might make you like feel like you want to pay back, right? That you want to sort of make them proud and sort of prove yourself worthy of the efforts of your teachers and your mentors. And so we actually did a study with over 1,000 9th and 10th graders. And this was in 4 different high schools. One was an elite independent school in Los Angeles. One was like a working class Catholic school in the Valley in Southern California. One was a big public high school in one of the beach cities, Manhattan Beach. And one was a very diverse charter school in New York. And so what we found was these students were asked to write gratitude letters over the course of 4 weeks. And we found that those students who wrote gratitude letters reported wanting to put more effort into being a better person and into improving themselves relative to the control group. The control group here, like before, we asked students to organize their time by keeping track of their activities. So it's also kind of a positive activity, but not as positive as gratitude. And this is actually one of my favorite findings. We measured healthy eating, and over the course of 4 months. So the study baseline to post-test is 4 weeks, and then we had a 3 months follow-up. So over the course of 4 months, the students in the control group actually showed less healthy eating. They ate fewer vegetables and fruits, more junk food and more fast food over the course of the study. But the students who wrote gratitude letters for 4 weeks actually showed better or sort of sustained healthy eating over the course of the study. And finally, this is the last result I'm going to show you. We also looked at life satisfaction over the course of the study. Now, many of you know that students, especially like middle school students and high school students and college students, they tend to lose satisfaction or lose motivation over the course of the school year, over the course of a semester. So they kind of start out kind of gung-ho, and then they kind of lose satisfaction. And you see here, we found the control group did lose satisfaction over the course of the semester, the school year. These schools are actually on trimesters. But the students who wrote gratitude letters every week to their coaches and teachers and to their parents, they did not lose satisfaction over the school year. So that's pretty cool to show. So I'm going to conclude my talk. Might sound like a kind of a worn out cliche, but as you hopefully have now seen, I've landed on this cliche after a great deal of empirical research. And so the conclusion basically is that if you want to be happier and if you want to experience the benefits of happiness, whether it's greater work productivity or stronger relationships or better health, both during fraught and taxing times like we've just experienced the last 20 months and during the normal ups and downs of life, research suggests that you should focus not on yourself, but on others, both on supporting other people, but also on recognizing the ways that other people have supported you. So thank you very much. I'd love to answer some questions. That's often my favorite part.
This is sort of the fireside portion of our presentation tonight. So, Sonja, there's a question here that's coming in from the chat, is having to do with religious institutions and participation in religious affiliations and happiness. For anything related to those two, is there a connection between that?
Thank you, Sylvan. Great question about religion. So lots of studies show that religious people are happier and spiritual people are happier than those who are not religious or spiritual. So we know this, it's a pretty robust finding. People who attend religious services more often are happier. So the question really is why? And there's a couple of explanations that theorists have put out. One is that people who are religious report a greater kind of purpose in life and greater meaning in life than those who are not religious. And two is that people who are involved in religious communities, because of those communities, they sort of feel a stronger sense of connection and social support and stronger relationships. So I guess one of my conclusions from that research is that you don't have to actually be religious to experience the benefits of religion, right? That you can be non-religious and have meaning and have strong families and communities. But people who are religious tend to have both of those things.
Interesting. So moving ahead to thinking about the holidays coming up, Sonja, how about this idea of materialism, and how can parents best manage the holidays to encourage long-term happiness strategies?
Mm-hmm. It's a really great question, because during the holidays, we all are really focused on giving gifts, right? And often the gifts are like material things, right? They're objects, almost like by definition, it almost has to be something that's wrapped, But research suggests that actually a couple of things. One is that materialism is associated with less happiness. So people who are materialistic are less happy. Now, not to say that those of us who give a lot of gifts during the holidays are materialistic, because that is really something that's situational, that sort of a lot of people do. But if it kind of produces more materialism, kids tend to be actually very materialistic, sort of young kids especially. They're kind of so focused on the gift. My little kids are, like all throughout the year, they're like, this is what I want, for my birthday or for the holidays. But also some relevant research in this area is that research shows that experiences are more likely to make people happy than material possessions. So if you're giving a gift, I guess this is my tip that some of you might have read about in magazines or newspaper articles, because it's been written up a lot, this finding that if you want to spend money on something that makes you happy, spending money on experiences is more happiness inducing. So if you give a gift of, whether it's an amusement park visit or a dinner or a massage or like a game or something, I don't know, escape room or something, like experiences are going to make people happier than material things.
Sense. So, parents often feel pressure to have their children experience the best, in terms of anything, from athletics to AP classes. And so they often feel that in these areas require to gain access to college and all of that. So tell us about how to manage competitiveness and how that affects our children's happiness.
Yeah, wow. That's a really, really big question. Those of you interested in the answer, there's a Tal Ben-Shahar, who's a happiness expert, world happiness expert, has a book called The Pursuit of Perfect. And a lot of it is about that. It's kind of like that pursuit of perfectionism. But, basically, I'm not going to say anything I think that anyone doesn't know, but, balance is really important for happiness. I guess one way to answer that question is there's sort of three things that have been shown that really matter the most for happiness. One is connecting with others. Two is contributing to community or society. And three is personal growth. So anything that you can do with your kids to encourage personal growth, connecting with others, and contributing to others or to society. And, trying to get into the best college does not necessarily fulfill those sort of three buckets of of purposes. Maybe it can. And so if your kids are able to have time to really spend time on friendships and on relationships, that is really, really critical. And remember what I've showed, happier kids are going to be more productive. They're going to be more creative. They're going to be more resilient. they're going to be healthier, physically healthier, and of course, mentally healthier too, by definition. And so they actually are going to do better if they're happier. And so, but if they're stressed out and they're unhappy, they're not going to do as well. So, doing all-nighters doesn't really help. Now, having said that, I certainly did my share of studying in all-nighters. And I guess I wish I had more time to focus on, again, personal growth, contributing to community, and connecting with others.
This next question actually sort of relates to what you just responded to, but this whole thing about children and being overscheduled and affecting their overall happiness, and this whole thing about, are busy kids happy kids, or how do we approach that as parents?
Yeah. You have to think about like what is most important, because if you think that, really one way to think of it, this is kind of a tautological answer, but one way to think about it is that like anything we do because ultimately we think it's going to make us happy, right? So like we pressure our kids to work really, really hard so they can do really well in their classes and get into college and all of that, because we think ultimately that's going to make them happier, because they're going to get like a better job and they're going to, going to have a better life as a result of that. And so I guess we have to really question that assumption, if that's actually true, and if they're so unhappy that they're, we know there's an epidemic right now of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, among, especially anxiety and depression among youth. I went to a parent meeting at my daughter goes to a small liberal arts college. It's a women's college. And we went to the sort of the first day, like a parent meeting. And one of the deans revealed to us that 1 out of 3 women at the college are on prescription medication for mental health problems. And that 1 out of 3, and there was sort of this collective gasp in the audience. And that doesn't even count the women that may have mental health issues but they're not on any kind of medication. And so, yes, do we want that for our kids? Do we want our kid to be one of those 3 girls? So she's in the college, she got in, yay, but she's clinically depressed or anxious. So again, I feel like I'm not saying anything that anyone doesn't know, but again, happier kids they're going to be more productive, they'll be more resilient, they'll be healthier, they'll be more creative, they'll have better relationships. So it's kind of like a upward, not the opposite of vicious cycle, it's an upward spiral.
Right. So this question came in: has there been research done on the impact of parental happiness and on their children? Are these learned behaviors? So if a parent is feeling not so happy or happy, how much of that is taught to their child?
That's a great question. I actually don't know much research other than, well, of course, there's research in behavior genetics showing that happiness is in part heritable. So yes, happier parents tend to have happier children, in part because if they're biological children, because happiness is in part heritable. But also we do absolutely sort of model our, behavior to our kids, right? So if we freak out about a little thing, right, we kind of model that. But the heritability is pretty strong. And so studies show that if you're an unhappy person and your child is adopted into a happy family, that the child, even the sort of the happy parental the role modeling is not going to really help after the child leaves the family. But while they're in the home, they're going to be happier with happier parents. But once they leave the home, then the genetics kind of prevail. So, that's a kind of complicated answer. But if you want your child to be happy while they're living with you, then model happy behaviors. Once they're out of the house, you might have modeled happy behaviors every day. That the genetics is going to be more important, I think, and what they decide to do is going to be more important than your moral modeling.
Interesting. How do parents find the activities that are right for their families to build happiness? This one really relates to this idea of fit, and if you have a family with children with different sort of things that trigger their sort of happiness strategies, how do you deal with sort of varying personalities and responses to happiness strategies? How does a parent manage that?
Right. I think it's a great, actually, the premise of the question is a great one, because you're not asking, what should I do to make my kids happy? You're sort of, you're implying that actually there's not one thing to do. And so you don't want to necessarily, I don't know, sit around the dinner table and express gratitude. I mean, some families do that. I've tried to do that and my kids do not respond well to that, or maybe one of them does and the other ones hate it, so just like with anything, I mean, your kids have different talents and different hobbies, and some of them are really good at math and chess, and others are really great at dance, or so you kind of we all know kind of intuitively that fit is really critical, but that fit is not only with like academics or sports or hobbies, it's also with sort of the pursuit of happiness. And so you could sort of find out or ask the kids, or they can kind of, if they're old enough, kind of complete their own surveys and find out like what fits them best, and then work with them individually. And again, I don't think it's that hard because we already intuitively do it every day, right? We sort of treat our kids differently depending on their interests and their personalities. They're not raised the exact same way, even if they're in the same household.
Right, and spending time with them individually is a good way to tackle that. So this question is deal with peer pressure and the enormous sense of peer pressure our children might be feeling, our youth might be feeling. How do you create a sense of happiness without giving in to peer pressure? Or how do you manage peer pressure and this idea of happiness?
So you mean peer pressure to be happy?
Well, it says, I guess that the question has to do with creating a sense of happiness without giving in to peer pressure. I think that the question, it has to do with peer pressure sort of sort of putting sort of a negative influence on this youth. I think this parent's asking about how to encourage happiness. How can happiness prevail, so to speak, despite peer pressure?
Despite peer pressure. I guess it depends what the peer pressure is. So if the peer pressure is, say, on, I don't know, studying all the time, or the opposite, partying all the time, I'm not an expert. I'm not a developmental psychologist, but I think when we instill values in our kids, I mean, we instill individualist values anyway, because we live in an individualist society where you kind of like focus, you think about what you want, and you're not just sort of reacting to what other people want. By the way, there's pros and cons of that approach, of that perspective. But I think we're already kind of instilling those values in our kids, which helps them sort of decide for themselves what they want to do. And so like, do they, respond to the peer pressure, or do they kind of focus on what they want? Maybe they want some balance in their life. Maybe they want to get off screens, and the peer pressure, I mean, this is a really big source of the peer pressure, is to be on social media and on screens all the time. And they, so we have to help instill in them kind of a sense of agency and a sense of confidence that it's okay to sort of be different from other people. I think that's a really hard one.
But it's all, again, going back to that parent-child relationship and spending time with their child to really hear their voice. Have you found studies that show people from different locations, states, that are happier due to lifestyle, family, and climate?
Yes. Well, actually, climate is a really good one. You mean like weather? Because we think there's actually a really fun paper that like that I think it's called something like I think I'll be happier if I move to California. So they compared people who lived in Midwest and California, and both sets of people thought they'd be more or less happy in like the worse or the better climate, and actually they weren't, because and the reason is we adapt to where we live. So at first we might be unhappy, but then we sort of adapt, we get used to it, we get used to all kinds of climate. But there are definitely regional differences. So like if you look at the US, certainly there are cultural differences, but just within the US, there's sort of a map somewhere I could probably find that shows sort of differences in happiness. Like Midwesterners are happier, and people on the coast tend to be less happy. But, the question is really, how do you interpret that? Like, what does that mean? It could be the type of people who tend to move to different locations are going to be different. So it's not necessarily that those locations, those environments make people happy. But we also know, for example, like being in nature is associated with positive mood and sort of better, kind of more tranquility. And so if you spend time with nature, you can live in an urban environment and still be happy, but nature contributes to happiness. So on the other hand, connection, right? Human connection majorly contributes to happiness. So if you live in a place where you're interacting socially with people, that's important too. So So anyway, lots of different sort of determinants of why someone might be happy living in different locations. So I would not necessarily say, if you want to be happy, move to X place, because that's not gonna work.
But the nature piece is really interesting, and spending more time in nature. Is that kind of go across the board as well? Have you done studies about that further?
Yeah. There's studies. I haven't, but there's studies like even, I mean, it's kind of funny, like even having a window where you kind of look out onto nature. Even there's a study where they had people just have like paintings of nature on the walls, like that actually made people feel like sort of more calm than non-natural environments. And the idea kind of is that like we were sort of evolutionarily hardwired to, respond to natural environments. There are scenes of mountains and water and all of that. So, and trees. So yeah, nature is called it's attention restorative. So when you're kind of in an urban, I mean, I'm a total urban person. So like I love urban environments, and I would spend all my time there. But the theory is that when you're in an urban environment, there's all these sort of quote unnatural things that are trying to get your attention, like car honks and signs on the street, and like just all kinds of things that are happening, and it just tires you out. It basically makes you tired, and the nature kind of restores your energy and your attention. And so that's the idea.
So thank you. This one actually goes back to the social media piece. I think parents are very interested about this question around its impact on children's happiness, children and then youth, so adolescents into adolescence. Talk to us more about social media, Sonja, and different forms of technology and its effect on happiness.
Right. And really, it's a really important question. So there's lots of correlational research that show that people who are, that basically spending time with social media is associated with less happiness, lower self-esteem, sort of all the bad stuff. But it's correlational, right? So we don't know and the effects are generally pretty small, and it's a correlation. So it could be this sort of, kids who already have lower self-esteem are spending more time on social media, right? Now, but the effects are greater for girls, for teen and tween girls. And it turns out it's in part because boys tend to spend more time gaming, and gaming is often social. And sort of basically to me, like the bottom line is anything that's social in like a positive way, as opposed to social as in like you're, comparing yourself to others, tends to not be either happiness inducing or sort of not negative. And so boys tend to not to be sort of as harmed by screen time. Girls, especially young girls, tweens, and again, and teens seem to be more harmed, but the research is correlational. So there are very few experiments. One of my own students actually did a big study with 18-year-olds where she sort of asked people for 8 days to either get off all social media or get off all digital media as much as possible. Like we couldn't sort of force people to, like, if they had to use Google Maps or if they had to like read an email or something or text, they could do that. But we found basically that getting off digital media made people more mindful and feeling more competent, less stressed. But getting off social media actually didn't have benefits and really even had some costs, more negative emotions. And it could just be, again, that like the youth are so embedded in social media that if you get off of it, right, you're basically isolated, right? Because the whole school, and there are schools that are sort of trying to implement this. If a whole school, gets off social media for a while, then that might work. If they actually do it. But if only a couple of kids do it at the time, it doesn't seem to work. But yeah, it's a really, really important question, really complicated question. I don't want to say that technology is bad, because you could also use technology to try to connect with others or even engage in happiness exercises, right? There are apps that allow you to do that. So it's not all good, it's not all bad. We just have to be thoughtful about how we use it.
Going back to balance, right, Sonja?
Yeah.
The importance of balance. And how about sleep? There was a recent study that came out of MIT about productivity and students on the college level around different levels of sleep. Is there any sort of correlative studies around sleep? We know as children go into adolescence, they seem not to sleep very much. It's an issue. Have there been any studies around that?
Right. Again, I'm not an expert on sleep, but lots of research shows that sleep is really critical for everything, brain development and success as well, and happiness too. In fact, one of the most famous studies had people write down about the activities that they did during the day and sort of how much sleep they got, and everything sort of they were doing, and then correlated with happiness. And actually, lack of sleep was, I think, maybe the biggest correlation with unhappiness. So lack of sleep the night before. And so clearly, not sleeping enough makes us unhappy, but also has all kinds of other, negative consequences as well. So yeah, I don't think I need to sort of reiterate or convince anyone that sleep is important. It's just a matter of how do you get our kids to sleep more? That's right. And ourselves for that matter. That's the problem. That's the question. The $1 billion question, right?
It is. It absolutely is. So we've got some more questions. Are you ready? Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. How about, now this is a question about mindfulness and meditation on increasing happiness. And, do you study that? And tell us a little bit more about that. Mindfulness and meditation on happiness.
Right. I don't study it myself, but there are tons of experiments where people are taught or are instructed to meditate, different kinds of meditation. Mindfulness meditation is a popular one, but also loving kindness meditation. And it makes people happier. It makes people feel more connected. So lots of positive benefits. There's some studies just recently have found that come out that sometimes people who meditate are less pro-social or might be, or if they're individualists. So there's sort of some nuanced findings out there just very, very recently that mindfulness meditation isn't always, it can make you kind of be a little bit more self-focused, right? Because it's kind of, but that's more recent. Generally, the result is that it makes you feel, happier when you engage in meditation on a regular basis and less stressed.
When you said a regular basis, it was talking about daily, weekly, like how does that?
Yeah, it really depends on the study. I've seen some studies that's daily, but it doesn't have to be that long. It could be as little as like 8 or 10 minutes a day, I think. I remember a study that I read. I'm really not expert on meditation, but I think it depends on the study.
Okay. But would you consider it a happiness strategy?
Yes, I would.
Good.
And in fact, my book, The How of Happiness, has a chapter where I cover meditation.
So now I'm back to some other questions that we've had is about COVID and its impact on children's level of happiness. There was a period of time during COVID when most families had quieter, simpler lives. And then, did this affect children's happiness levels? But then, tell us about sort of what happened during COVID, or it's still happening,
Yeah.
It's not over yet.
Yeah.
Tell us
I like how you put that in the past tense. I'm like, I like to think of it. So I actually, one of my students and I actually have written a couple of papers about the effects of COVID on well-being and connection. So I'll just tell you kind of the bottom line results. So 70% of people, let's just take the United States, about 70% have done quite well during COVID. Have some people report actually, this is the best thing that ever happened to me. My grown kids moved in with me. We had as you say, like a kind of, we connected as a family, and of course, these are also people who are able to have the resources to teach their kids, while they're in Zoom school that we all experienced for a year or so. Well, not all of us, but many of us did. So 70% have done really quite well, but 30% have not done so well. And about 10 to 15% have really suffered. In terms of kids, we know that there are kids who really suffered in terms of academic setbacks, if they were not able to be in person. And then there's adults and I don't know much about kids, but certainly adults, more depression, anxiety, substance abuse, gaining weight, that all happened. That is all real. But the average effect was actually neutral to positive. For example, relationships, we've all heard of like the COVID divorces. That is a thing, but actually on average, people who had a partner during COVID actually became even more closer to that partner. So it was on average, it's actually a positive effect. So it sort of depends if you want to focus on like average effect or if you want to focus on the people who did suffer, which is like, 10 to 30% really did not do so well.
Jeez. So my last question, how do we as parents incorporate happiness building into our daily lives with our families? Can you provide examples of things that you've seen that have been really effective, infusing into our daily life with our families?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a great question to end on. Thank you, Silvana. Well, first of all, I just want to say that happiness activities don't have to like take extra time. It's not like, oh, you have to go to the gym and like work in like an hour or two, like 3 times a week. You know, it could be something that's really woven in and kind of embedded into your life. So again, it could be like during dinner time or while you're in the car driving, you sort of talk to your kids about sort of taking an optimistic perspective on something, you know, like they come up from school, something, there's some drama with their friends or their teacher, you know, whatever, criticize them for something. It's like, well, how do you, you know, you can sort of reframe that, sort of that is sort of teach. We are already doing that already, but kind of, can we do this even more? Teach them a more positive perspective, teach them gratitude, kind of practice it, again, as you're sort of doing other activities. So it becomes sort of habitual. So again, it's not like, oh, like for 20 minutes every Monday, we're going to do this, right? It's just something that, again, sort of weave it in, you know, helping others. A lot of kids love to help. That's something that's very easy to kind of add, you know, weave in, you know, what can you do today? What can you do this week? Can you help a classmate when they're having trouble understanding a question on a homework assignment? You know, and there's lots of activities. Physical exercise actually is one of them. Pursuing goals, you know, thinking about what is your goal? What do you want to get better at? You know, what can you do this week to do that? So again, sort of weaving in these kinds of strategies, mindfulness, whether it's mindfulness meditation, that does take time because you have to learn it, using an app like Headspace or something with your kids. But again, I just want to say that I think it's something that can really be embedded in your daily life and doesn't have to be sort of extra time that you're spending.
Sonja, thank you. You have provided such a wealth of knowledge and information to all of us, and it's been so relevant to our lives. And your contributions as a research scientist are truly remarkable, Sonja, so thank you. We can all take from this time together strategies on how to live fuller and happier lives. We wish you continued success. And I'd like to also remind everybody on this time together tonight, thank you for coming tonight. Please fill out the survey. The link is in the chat, and so you can just click on it, and there it is. So Sonja, it's been terrific having you, and on behalf of the 16 area schools affiliated with Princeton Common Ground, I'd also like to thank the co-chairs, Elisa Liang and Vandana Bonot, for their professionalism and guidance on our Princeton Junior School, and our Princeton Junior School's representatives, Beth Glassberg and Aaron West, for their dedication and support. And finally, to my rainbow, my Princeton Junior School family and my own family, thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.